she felt that, no, I'm going to pull this Brexit thing off. And if she's supporting it and backing it, God forbid. Well, what constitutional rights do the British people have against that? If a monarch started doing, I mean, God forbid, but I'm just speculating now. Let's say when Trump came to London, he said, look, Queenie, and takes her aside and says, I'll tell you what, I'll give you personally $100 billion if you do Brexit and let me buy the NHS. And let's just imagine for 1 second, thought experiment. The Queen said, that's quite a good offer. Will you throw in a couple of private islands? And, you know, how about, you know, some real estate in Florida? And Trump says, yeah, no problem, no deal, just talk to my staff afterwards. Well, I mean, I don't think that could have happened, but just imagine something like that happened. Well, then I think we need a more constitutionally robust architecture to rein in the possibility of this kind of a development. Because at the moment, the monarch seems to have too much power to do stuff behind and off screen and off the radar. And I think we've seen with Prince Andrew's misbehaviour, again, there's an arrogance there that they're above the law and above morality. And they shouldn't be, obviously. As head of the church, she is under the spiritual laws of God. And if not, then she's gone completely, well, at some point, you know, a monarch who acts contrary to the laws of God abdicates and steps down and is replaced by a monarch who actually adheres to the laws of God, which means truth. So there are big questions to ask about the future of the monarchy. It's not impossible that the people of Scotland will eventually choose to have a republic system of government. Sorry, that was a slight emergency caused by the cat going after the cheese. Anyway, I also then go on to talk about the Labour Party, and I'm speaking, by the way, about the Queen as a moderate constitutional monarchist. You know, I'm in favour of keeping a monarchy. I have met members of the royal family. I'm a historian. I love the history of the monarchy in Britain. But I do think it needs to be modernised and brought up to you know, contemporary standards of probity and answerability. I'd like to see them go more walkabout among the people. And I did actually write to the Queen and say, I reminded her that in history, just monarchs always go and spend a couple of weeks now and then among the people in anonymity to see what's going on the street. I know people that used to walk the dog on near where I lived in Chithurst and bumped into at Midhurst. A friend of mine who's now dead once was walking out in the park and met the Queen walking her corgis, and they had a nice chat. You know, that's good. More of that, please. And I think the Queen would then realise that this Brexit thing is an utter nonsense. So then I talk about Labour Party policy and the manifesto, a lot of which I think is very good and common sense. It's kind of shifting the clock back to how I remember as a boy growing up. I talk about the politics of the UK general election, and unfortunately, you see, I don't think Labour can win an overall majority without help from other Remain parties. Their general policy of a second referendum is good. They should have said this all along. And they should have been doing an alliance with the Lib Dems all along to oppose Brexit and bring about a second referendum. Why is it only now they're offering this? You know, Corbyn seems to have the processing rate intellectually of, you know, not fast enough for my choice, really. But finally he's got there. So really, as I've said, the only solution is to vote tactically among all the people that are opposing Brexit. I talk about the World Intellectual Forum, which is set up globally. I'm the European coordinator. We're looking for liaison contacts with intellectuals both in Britain and throughout Europe and throughout the world. I even mentioned a commentary I'm doing on Das Kapital, Marx's book, which I mentioned before because my mother was a communist involved with, detailed study of Das Kapital, which is never read in our generation. My children, probably have never read it, and most of the younger generation, it's regarded as something that is outmoded. But there are many passages in it that are shockingly relevant, which describe poverty, and which try and explain what causes poverty. And it's this vast overaccumulation of capital in smaller and smaller numbers of hands, creating a monopoly condition. And a lot of what Marx says is still relevant to the analysis of how Brexit came about. It is a creation by very wealthy oligarchs, the super rich, who are trying to circumvent the social legislation the European Union is doing, and to circumvent the human rights that workers now have throughout the European Union, the rights to maternity leave and so on and so on. It's the super rich simply trying to push the clock back to pre-Marxist times, pre-Victorian times. And so we need to read our Das Kapital, I'm afraid, and you can hear my commentary on it on the website of the Global Green University. It's not the whole text, because that would take me the rest of my life. It's selected key passages, but still very, very comprehensive. And I'm doing that work in parallel to my commentary on the Quran and the different Jewish and Christian scriptures and other works. So then I talk about Brighton and the Sussex peace movement. I'm a protege of the Sussex community. I grew up in Brighton and Lewes and went to school, to Brighton Grammar School. And I love Sussex and Brighton. And my mother was the coordinator of the Sussex Alliance for Peace, or for nuclear disarmament. And we have the banner here and many of the archives of that group. Sussex doesn't want the chaos of Brexit. It's a European area, and in Brighton it was a Remain city. It's the only Green MP in Britain who I support. So I talk about all that. I then talk about the Scottish intellectuals, people that I've met and that are now, I think, 100% against Brexit and for retaining European Union membership. It's just regarded as just an obvious thing in Scotland. It's a benefit to the Scottish people. I also mention a great Welsh intellectual, Lord Davies of Llandinam, who was the Liberal Democrat MP for Montgomeryshire, where I used to live. I love Montgomeryshire. I love Montgomery, the old town there. And I've written an encyclopedia of the Welsh Marches based on my teaching when I lived there for 10 years. And Lord Davies was a great Welshman. He was a thinker, he was a Freemason, he was a Christian. He funded the National Library in Aberystwyth. He was personally a millionaire. And he was able to fund out of his own largesse the building of that fantastic library in Aberystwyth, which I know and love well, as well as the Temple of Health in Cardiff, and Greganog, which is an institute attached to the University of Wales, where I've also taught. And he funded the whole thing. He gave his money away to educational work. He worked tirelessly for the League of Nations in the 1920s and 30s. He was a Liberal Democrat, or a Liberal in those days, who he parted company with Lloyd George. He didn't feel Lloyd George had done enough for peace, ultimately. And he then went off and did his own thing. And he died, tragically, during World War II, having essentially failed to prevent World War II. He did everything he could to stop it. He sponsored the International Intellectual League for Cooperation, which was a project of the League of Nations, which had the great thinkers of the day, Einstein, Henry Bergson, Gilbert Murray, and others. And this guy, Lord Davies, helped fund it. And he was, for many years, also a Liberal MP. So, in his name and his intellectual legacy, I look through the lens at Brexit, and he would be appalled, because he was a true Welsh internationalist who believed in international cooperation for peace, fundamentally, as did all these great people. I've discovered there is no comprehensive biography of Lord Davies, and I've suggested that maybe it's time to produce one. And then I talked about the manifesto. I give it in the newsletter. So anyway, that's my newsletter, which people are welcome to read. Email me, I'll send you a copy. I'm just summarising here. As ever, it's a lot of work to produce these things, but I'm trying to do so because I believe fundamentally that educational information, presenting the facts, ultimately does win the argument. You know, I'm a lawyer effectively in court arguing against the opposition lawyers who are saying Brexit is the best for Britain. I'm saying no, this is the evidence. These are the facts that I've been able to assemble, Your Honour. And the judge is the British people. The judge is the British people who have to decide who to vote for on December the 12th. And I'm saying please don't vote for these Brexit crazy people that are run by sharks and charlatans and oligarchs. All the decent, honourable, intelligent, kind, loving people I know have made that realisation a long time ago. And this is why I don't really believe these polls that keep announcing that, you know, Boris Johnson on track for a landslide victory. I mean, I know there's a certain type of person that doesn't listen to anything on the internet, doesn't even know how to operate the internet, just reads the Daily Mail and that's it, and listens to the odd bit of BBC. And so those people might well be brainwashed into thinking everything's fine, Brexit's going ahead, get it done, vote for Boris. But I think they're in the minority. I know very, very few people like that now. Most people have woken up and joined the 21st century and joined the dots and realised it's a catastrophe. And I'm praying that enough people do. So that's the first thing I wanted to say is about my newsletter. I want to mention now the question of this shooting that took place on the 29th of November, just the other day. There is some doubt as to what was behind all this. You know, it's one of those conspiratorial type discussions going on already on the internet. There is a strange video circulating which shows the thing might have been a fake event. And I urge you to look at that video. I suspend judgment, but it does seem very convenient that that thing should happen just now when Boris Johnson was falling in the polls. It seems so ridiculously cleverly engineered, and there's evidence of the guy who's supposed to be shot actually moving and putting his jacket on, and so there's very anomalous kind of evidence surfacing. Suspend judgment, look at that video, which keeps being taken down off the internet, by the way, which itself is suspicious. So, you know, don't immediately jump to conclusions and believe what we read in the press. Let's look at the evidence. Do forensic research. Also, another thing I want to comment on is the tragedy of the ridiculousness of Stanley Johnson, the father of Boris Johnson, and his comments in this last week when he was asked and challenged on primetime chat show, you know, was his son a liar? He's been called Pinocchio. Johnson's response, Mr. Johnson Sr., was incredible. It's like the British people are too unintelligent to even understand what we're talking about. It revealed an incredible disdain of the average Joe in the street. Now, I've met people like that. I've met people at all class levels, from, you know, working class up to aristocracy and everywhere in between. I've met a certain type of, normally they're nouveau riche, they're not real aristocrats. Genuine aristocrats would never say such a thing because they have a certain noblesse oblige. But nouveau riche type aristocrats, which is Stanley Johnson's background, they have this sort of, they've adopted this casual disdain for ordinary people as uneducatable, etc., and ignorant or thick. And that's, you can see that's what Stanley Johnson actually believes. And that attitude has obviously gone down to his son, because watching Stanley Johnson in that interview, it's like watching his son with his attitudes, this disdain for ordinary people. And yet this very clever pretend game that he does as, oh yeah, I'm one of the lads, oh, I was mayor of London, yeah, you know. Well, when you listen to Stanley Johnson's dismissal of the average Brit as ignorant, you realise the penny drops. That's what Boris Johnson deep down thinks. That's why he thinks he can hoodwink us, and that's why he thinks he can pull off this Brexit nightmare for us all. Well, no, I'm sorry, you can't. And it was very shocking and revealing that Stanley Johnson, in a sense, was exposed for his attitude. Boris Johnson's sister is a much nicer more intelligent person who's actually come out in support of the Liberal Democrats, I believe. But strangely enough, you're not seeing her on the news very much, are you? And Boris Johnson, of course, daren't expose himself, so he's minimising all his appearances. The more he says, the less we like him. And so they're trying to keep him away from exposure. That's why he wouldn't go on the debate about climate change, why he won't go on public, fora and so on. Well, that tells us all we need to know, really. This person is not worth electing. Then we come to another strange incident that happened this week, and I followed this incident. A fellow campaigner for Remain, a man called Peter Cook, he was a friend of my late colleague Mark Williams, who mysteriously died for his opposition to Brexit 2 years ago now, under extremely suspicious circumstances that I'm still trying to get to the bottom of. Peter Cook has kept going. He's an anti-Brexit campaigner. He's a guitarist. He's a man of culture. And he had a sign in his car saying bollocks to Brexit, right? And he was stopped by the police and hassled and more or less bullied and threatened to remove it. You can watch him explaining what's going on. What I find shocking about this incident is the attitude of the police. I mean, what on earth have we come to as a country where the police have the right to, threaten somebody because they're against Brexit? Are they going to come to my house and start beating me up? I believe my friend Mark Williams was murdered for his opposition to Brexit, and there's a great deal of evidence that may well be the case. I've been trying to get an inquiry and have been utterly frozen out. No way will they release even the shadow of a doubt. And it might not be the only victim of whoever was behind the illegality of the 2016 referendum was behind the murder of my ex-campaigner Mark Williams. I'm 99% sure of that, and I can send you the evidence. But Peter Cook, anyway, carries on, bless him, and keep it up, because these people are crooks and criminals. What's unfortunate is that, the police, some of the police, seem to think it's their mission to get with that message. A politicisation of the police is one step away from us becoming a police state. And that must be resisted democratically, and we should complain to the authorities. That policeman should be investigated and stripped of his rank and disciplined. The man, Peter Cook, wasn't breaking any laws by having a bollocks to Brexit sticker up. The guy's fantasies concocting stuff. Then we come to the business of, I mentioned this last week, but just to say the Trump impeachment process, which seems to be going on, is related to Brexit, because Trump is so keen for Brexit. It makes you wonder what else he's got in his stable. I mean, he seems to be intellectually challenged. He's simply a businessman, and can't join up the dots and see the implications. Anyway, I think the American people have seen through him, and his days are numbered. And the testimony given so far in the impeachment process is pretty damning. I'm sure it will get worse for him. I think that I also want to mention that I've been in touch with a colleague of mine from Afghanistan, who is a former student of mine, who's trying to organise an international Afghan council. I've suggested Rory Stewart be involved. This is in the last week. And that, yes, it's a good idea to have an Afghan International Council to discuss peace building in Afghanistan. It's a country I've never been to. I've flown over several times going to India. I love its history and culture. And it was the unfortunate locus of the so-called Great Game between Britain and Russia. When we invaded it twice, Britain did. And both times we were kicked out. We lost. It was the only time the British Empire in India ever lost, militarily. We learned the hard way. You don't really go into Afghanistan. It's just unconquerable. The Russians then made a mistake in '79, and there's been chaos there ever since. It's important that we get a peace policy for Afghanistan. there is a European Union police presence in Afghanistan trying to help stabilise the country. That's a good thing, and we need more initiatives to stabilise that beautiful country. It needn't be as poor as all the signs show it is. It's only because of war. It's a very proud country. The people are very proud of their heritage, and it used to be called the Switzerland of Asia because it was a neutral little country in the middle, or quite a big country actually, but not by Asian standards. And I think we should help it go back to that. So, and we can do that best as Britain by staying in the EU and helping with aid and support and intellectual trainings and so on. The Afghan refugee community is scattered throughout Europe, not just in the UK. There are many in London and Britain, but there's also others in Germany, in France, and from an Afghan perspective, Britain leaving the EU is a catastrophe. It means that what happens? No, keep the EU together, let us become a force of peace, let us help influence peace building in Afghanistan, let us work with the Russians and the Americans to neutralise that country. Hands off Afghanistan, it's not your playground. This whole great game between Britain and Russia was, I think, an intellectual error. It would have been much better had Britain and Russia taken their imperial responsibilities seriously to make peace in the world, prevented World War I happening, and genuinely, moved a world forward of peace in which Afghanistan could have played an honourable role and still can. So important moves afoot in Afghanistan to get peace there. I'm also off to India later in December, so after the elections are over, when I hope to God I'm going to pray with all the strength of all the religions that I've studied for 40 years, that this liar and mendacious government led by Boris Johnson not return to power. Moderate Conservatives vote Liberal Democrat, that moderate progressive Remainers all come together and vote tactically. If so, we can do it. It's like an intelligence test for the British people, really. I'm a lover of Britain. I believe we can do it. I think we will rise to the occasion. There will be huge attempts to hijack that election. There will be probably interference. Well, there is interference. You can see it on the internet. Fake stories attacking liberalism, fake stories attacking Remain, etc. I think we've grown accustomed to all this in the last 3 years, and we know now who's doing all this stuff. I think Putin has made a mistake in attacking liberalism. I think he thinks that the way to attack Europe is to attack liberalism, and this is a good thing. Well, sorry, Putin. I thought you were more intelligent than that. My Russian friends, philosophers, are highly intelligent. We don't want a new autocracy in Russia. We don't want to go down the, that over-concentration of power to then do illegal things. The point of power is to have it to do good things. The point of enlightened, absolutism was to do good things for the people, not to facilitate their descent into chaos and conflict. And European Union is a good thing on Russia's frontiers. But it needs a peace treaty. It needs a non-engagement, non-violence peace accord signing. And that's what, I would like to see the European Union foreign policy shift to that 100% peace track, with Britain helping to make friends finally with Russia and fulfill that 1990 peace Paris treaty that happened, to get these talks with Iran back on track. And I think deep down, if you listen to Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, who I have a lot of time for, when he was at the Paris Peace Forum recently, this is an intellectual in the Foreign Office in Russia. He wants peace, as do the Russian people. So the European Union has to get its act together and deliver it, not destabilisation, chaos, and so on. Sorry, that's not in anybody's interests. Anyway, I will be making these points in India. I hope a few Russians will come. Others will come from America, wherever. It's an international forum for peace and non-violent action, discussing in Delhi in December 17th to the 21st we're talking about all aspects of peace building, particularly for youth, the next generation, and training in mediation and conflict resolution and so on. This should be in schools, peace education, mediation training. I did set up mediation services in schools in Britain. I was the first guy in Britain to train and do that. I trained in San Francisco. Every school should have an anti-bullying campaign that involves mediation for kids that are arguing with each other, and it gets nasty. Some kids stab each other, you know. In America it's horrendous. People go and start shooting. Well, the only solution is to train people in the importance of peace and the importance of peacekeeping and mediation. So that's what I'll be doing in India, and anyone that wants to come and join me is welcome. It's in Delhi. It's hosted by the Jains, who are the most peace-loving of all the spiritual communities on the planet. I met several of these great Jain leaders, Mahapragna and Acharya Tulsi and others. And we're fortunate to have Jains still with us on the planet. And then I'm also wanting to say that I'm also working on the Mary Magdalene Studies Association newsletter, and people are welcome to submit. I've just, been doing a lot of research since coming to France about Mary Magdalene and the Gnostic traditions of Christianity, which were the peace-loving traditions, which culminated in the Cathar movement that was brutally suppressed by armed, monarchist troops, thugs going down from the north of France and destroying this beautiful culture of Aquitaine and the Pyrenees region. But it still flourishes. There's still a peace-loving community there, and the Gnostic tradition of the Cathars believed in reincarnation. They believed in equality of the sexes, and I think that was much more in tune with the original teachings of Christ, and I think Mary Magdalene was indeed one of his closest disciples, as all the Gnostic Gospels and so on show, the Pistis Sophia, the Gospel of the others, Mary Magdalene's own Gospel, which I've done a commentary on. And to me, that internationalism of the authentic Gnostic teachings of Christianity is again another reason to keep the European Union, so that we can all travel and visit and be troubadours together. That's the vision of the troubadours of the Aquitaine culture, and that should live on. And it was in the old days, this where I'm speaking used to belong to the realm of Eleanor of Aquitaine, who married Henry II, and you could go from here, my little village of Bétet, all the way to Scotland and never leave the country. It was one thing. So the European Union just is an extension of our travelling rights as bards. Musicians are 100% against Brexit and the ridiculous imposition of borders and barriers on the creative industries, art, music, filmmaking and so on. If I want to go and make a film in Portugal, I should be able to do that without visas if I want to go to Glasgow or London, etc. So, and there's some interesting new things coming out about Mary Magdalene. I've discovered something interesting this week to share about Napoleon, who in many ways was a visionary he sort of was a bit of a mystic, old Napoleon. And this is a wonderful book that's come my way, Napoleon's Sorcerers, the Sophicians. And apparently when Napoleon went to Egypt, he took with him lots of savants and sages. He was very interested in Egyptian mysteries and the Egyptian mystery religions. And he took loads of archaeologists who discovered, among other things, the Rosetta Stone to translate the hieroglyphs. And there was an order founded in Egypt at the time of Napoleon's visit for esoteric revival of the Isis tradition. These were all Freemasons of a high degree in Napoleon's army and among his officers, who wanted to build a branch of Freemasonry dedicated to Isis and to Sophia, hence the order of Sophicians they were called, the order of wisdom lovers, effectively. And after Napoleon was booted out of Egypt and came back to France, they lived on, carried on, and their order carried on, and they wrote various books, and it was like Freemasonry plus ISIS worship. And they produced what's called the Golden Book, which had illustrations in it, which was used by the order. Now, this has all been hushed up for decades. Nobody knew about this. those of us who are interested in Masonic research and esoteric history of Western tradition, which I am, as you know, have known about Napoleonic France's interest in Freemasonry, and it was something very important in the Napoleonic Empire, which lived on afterwards and became part of the French Republic's legacy intellectually. And Macron, one of the first things he did was go and visit the Grand Orient in Paris, the library and museum there, which is, I've been several times, a wonderful place. Go and visit it. And you learn about the importance of Freemasonry in French culture. Littré, who did the great encyclopedia of French language, well, the dictionary, like a one-man Oxford English dictionary of French, was a Freemason and very active in it, as were most of the intellectuals of 19th and early 20th century French life. Anyway, this order is interesting because it's dedicated to Isis, the goddess of wisdom, and I think that these are the facts behind the Holy Blood, Holy Grail story, the Mary Magdalene type story. I think she was Isis, she was the Black Virgin, and Jesus and her were consciously trying to revive that pan-sophist wisdom. I've just finished a novel which more or less argues that. And these are the kinds of things we're studying in the Mary Magdalene Studies Association. Now, is this contrary to the teachings of the Church? I don't think so. You see, light is light is light. So the light from my candle is not contrary to the light from that light, or that one, or the one above. They just come at it from different angles. The Universal Church in all its forms, Anglican, Presbyterian, Church of Scotland, Quaker, etc., Methodist, Jesuit, Dominican, Cathar. As a historian of religions, I know they're all so fascinating and interesting. And then you've got like New Age Christians and Druid Christians, and we're all chasing the little bit of light that our culture has allowed us to see. No one of us has a total monopoly of all that light. I think if we adopt a position of intellectual humility, as Descartes did, or Socrates did, and said, look, there's so much stuff I don't know, we will get somewhere close to the possibility of sitting in that light of truth, which then we have the humility to be able to download. As Christ said, you can't teach people if they're so arrogant and puffed up. They're like full bottles. You can't put new wine into old bottles, full up bottles. So we need humility, and that's why the Mary Magdalene Studies thing is connected to me with this. You see, Brexit is like an outbreak of hubris affecting my compatriots. Hubris is the fatal disease of arrogance. It's, I know it all, I know what's best. We saw that in Theresa May, and we see that in Boris Johnson. At least we're not seeing that in the Remain lot. Although friends of mine have said, no, they don't like Jo Swinson, she comes over as arrogant. I think the woman is just frightened. She's terrified of Brexit, as she has every right to be, and therefore has dreamt up a sort of let's cancel it immediately policy. I don't think she's arrogant, I think she's just terrified. Corbyn is less arrogant. He's very, I think, very humble in the way he's dealt with this all the stuff that's been hurled at him, the abuse and so on. So I wish them well in the campaigning in the coming last 3 weeks before the election, in fact, 2 weeks. And also on this day, I want to share the fact that the Remain Manifesto is also in the newsletter. It has 19 chapters or paragraphs, which I've outlined on the web. It's in published form. It's also, I've done a commentary on it a couple of weeks ago, last week, so I won't repeat it now.